What is up, Phoenix family? I'm Ross Cessna, your effervescent and omnipresent host. We're about to go on an esoteric and occult odyssey. This isn't the designer spirituality that is polluting pop culture. It's your opportunity to explore age-old wisdom in the raw. With no further delay, I present to you the Spiritual Phoenix Podcast. All right, welcome everybody. We are joined today with Maechyl Boyle. I almost slipped there. Maechyl, what's up, man?
How you doing, Ross? You don't have a funny name that I can laugh at, but
Actually, Cessna is close to cesspool. When I was in high school, people would call me cesspool.
That's rough, man.
Do you know what a cesspool is? Does that translate?
I believe it's a big like hole in the ground that's full of human waste. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
How many points do I get? What's the next question?
That's all.
Hey, do you know what would be a cool idea? You could do some kind of podcast, or maybe we could do a podcast where it's like a game show. It's just like a podcast game show. That's a total new idea.
I don't know who would want to come on it, and what would we ask?
Okay, if you're listening to this and you're interested in our game show podcast, then please write into Ross Cesspool.
Send me a carrier pigeon or something via the Pony Express, please. So, Maechyl, I actually haven't released those other episodes yet as we're recording this. They're all going to be rolling out. But we had talked about, I don't even remember what we talked about the last time we spoke. Refresh my memory. You look just as lost as I do, but I'm putting all the pressure on you.
We spoke about, I don't know, man.
I don't either. Curiosity. Yeah.
That's exactly what it was. Jesus. It wasn't even that long ago.
It's like a month and a half ago. It's longer than you think, I feel like. Yeah, and so today you had said that you wanted to talk about progress.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious. You can start us off on this discussion, and then I'll come up with some questions as we go along.
Nice one. So I reckon progress, I reckon, is basically when, well, I had like a bunch of definitions and I don't even know what to start. Talk about it. Well, starting from minus, and then we'll make progress and we'll actually make some sense again. So let's say, for example, progress is a sense of like improvement, I think. And within spirituality, I think a really common like way that people measure progress. Let's look at, for example, yoga, right? And I'm not a huge like yoga practitioner. So I would like to be in the future. I hope to be, but that's spoken about because it's, for example, someone like me who wasn't blessed with pretty much any degree of flexibility or agility in my body. Like yoga is really hard for me. So like I can't touch my toes, like with my legs like straight, never, maybe like once in my life where I don't want to do that. But so for me to get there, I have to obviously practice a lot. So I have to practice loads and loads, and then eventually you get there. And then when you get there, it's like, oh my God, look at the progress I made, you know? And the thing I really like about yoga is what for me seems like impossible, for other people it's like really easy. And then for them, you know, if you can touch your toes, it's like, okay, now like put your toes like on your wrists or whatever, you know, and then you just get deeper and deeper into it until you end up, you know, being able to fit inside a stamped addressed envelope. I don't know, but the point is that there's all this like progress to be made, and it's like a way that you can view like the work that you've been putting in as being like worth it. But I think the yoga example is particularly potent because with yoga, like the stretching and everything, like it feels good and it's great, but that's not really what you're doing. It's other things, including like, you know, of course, breathing work and like, you know, recharging energetically your chakras or whatever, but also things like patience and everything as well, which I think is really closely tied into progress, because the thing about progress is generally cumulative and it takes time to like to build up on itself like that. So it's not something you can just like snap into, you know. Maybe some people can, but that's my point. Sorry, go around in circles. But for me, I can't just like, sure, I'll snap into like cool. I don't even know the names, man. But like touch my, grab onto like the bottom of my feet, or whatever. I can't do it, but other people can, and then for them there's something else. So I think I am starting to go in circles here, so you might as well you might as well jump in. That's my loose definition of progress.
Yeah, I really I like that definition, and I definitely think that that's one of the yoga is a good example of being able to physically measure the progress in the sense that you can see the difference, and it's easily measurable. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
something that's incredibly tangible to see. Um, but I also think that one of the things that, how do I want to phrase this? I like how you talked about it kind of being cumulative in the sense that like you build it up over a period of time, and regardless of what your starting point is with any of those kind of disciplines, there's still this ability to cultivate more and more and expand yourself. And without getting too deep into the negative opinion of this kind of stuff, but I have to touch on it because it's what's coming up to me is I think one of the big issues in spiritual circles is this concept of being quote unquote woke, and then taking everything as being able to see everything clearly and not needing to do any work, and like really being in this very static point. And it's like the antithesis of progress. And it's actually like a really difficult trap to get out of, I think. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I was in this one Facebook group earlier, and somebody posted like how they were enlightened, like literally saying that they were enlightened. First off, that's funny as fuck. Like, and then secondly, like, what would be the point then? Like, what would be the point if there is no other progress to achieve after a certain point? To me, that's kind of when, if I'm not misunderstanding, there's this concept of being able to shed the body, in Indian traditions or Hindu traditions, and I also would want to say Buddhist traditions as well, where you're able to just consciously decide to shed the body. And it's like, well, if you become enlightened, why would you not just do that? Because then there's no need to be attached. Like, obviously, dude isn't, but
Mm.
I don't know, maybe he is, and maybe I'm just fucking up. What's your feeling on that whole concept of where do you think everything is supposed to go to in progress? I guess is my question.
Well, for me, I think that is a really good example what you're saying about someone, because it's that's part of in like Christianity as an example. There's the mystery of Jesus being like fully divine and fully human at the same time. Because you're right, like if you're divine, from our perspective as humans, you're perfected basically. Because we can't even see like the next level of challenges. Whatever there is to develop and make progress on up there. But so like, how can someone be fully divine when they're human? Because like that whole to err is human, like to forgive is divine, all that stuff. Because like we are like fallible, our bodies like fall apart. They're pretty, knees, like probably everyone listening has had some kind of like knee trouble, because there's just a terrible design,
I just had
and
bursitis. My knee was all fucked up, dude.
there you go, man. I've had runner's knee back in the day, arrows to the knee, whatever it is. But the point is, yeah, that like it can be like what our bodies are like gonna rot away one day, So there's a limited amount of progress that we can make, like spiritually, because that's the part of you that lives like forever, So like as for where everything's going, as far as that, I really like the way that I'm sure I mentioned her before, Alice Bailey. She's one of my favorite writers on esotericism. She explains in a couple of books. There's one, The Consciousness of the Atom, which talks about this, but also at the beginning of her book on Letters in Occult Meditation, she explains like a kind of like evolutionary hierarchy, let's say, of consciousness. So let's say on our planet, there's three below us, let's say. So the first one would be minerals, so like rocks and stuff like that. Crystals also, they have a form of consciousness. They're like, and also even at like a molecular level, like molecules can make decisions. Things like active transport. Remember like in school, osmosis, and then like active transport and all this kind of stuff, mitosis, all that stuff. But active transport, it requires energy, and also that it requires like an active intention. In other words, like consciousness to like move a nutrient from one side of the cellular barrier to the other. So it's like they can actually make decisions at that like low level. But anyway, sorry, minerals are the base, like the most like basic level of consciousness on our planet. Then you get to plants, which are like more aware. They can move around better. You know, they can like go towards like sunlight to get stuff. They're like better at like photosynthesis and stuff, and you know, whatever it might be. And then you get to animals, which of course are like even more evolved. Like they can move around better. They can like reason things. Like dolphins can like do mathematics and all that kind of stuff. And then you get to us, which is a weird one because it's like we're I believe that there were, at least the way I look at it, that I think this is from Alice Bailey. There's like essentially seven. We can look at it as like there being seven like levels of like evolution, and human beings are right in the middle, which I think is really fascinating because we have these like animal bodies, but also we have like this like spark of divinity in us, which is like way stronger in us than is in animals. You know, like our capacity for like philosophy, let's say, or even just like, you know, empathy and like emotions and all that stuff. It's like, I think like way more nuanced, certainly in most human beings. So it's like above us are like angels and so on and so forth. So like I think that it all just leads back to eventually all evolution is gonna, and all progress is gonna lead back to unity. Basically, I think that's kind of where it's all going. You know, and you can discuss whether like the aspect, the spark of consciousness is within like this piece of like crystal I've got in my hand, whether that like the consciousness in this is one day going to evolve like to a plant and an animal and a human being, etc., or if we're all the same consciousness, like all evolving towards one thing. And that's a different question, but yeah, that's basically where I think progress is going ultimately.
I like that. I have a couple things to say on that. So one of the cool things Alan Watts, in an Alan Watts lecture one time, he talks about how essentially we're still all part of the Big Bang. So we're technically all united under that same principle. So there is that whole sense of being one and then dispersing. And then there's a whole concept of the universe coming back in and kind of then exploding again, which I think is incredibly fascinating. And it would also make all kind of consciousness unified if it all came from one source. And then that would also kind of add validity to some claims of psychic stuff as well, because it gets into quantum physics. And if particles are related, there's this whole thing of quantum entanglement, blah, 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 without getting into it too much. But then also, if you look at, I want to say it's Kabbalah or one of those things, they kind of talk about this concept of us, there being this one great light, that light exploding, kind of dispersing all of these individual sparks. And then the purpose of life is to kind of reignite that spark or reconnect with that spark within us, inspire other sparks to kind of kindle and go along that path, and then eventually reintegrate back with that main spark. So it's kind of what you had talked about. It's relative to what some believe the process of the Big Bang would be as well, or what comes next after the Big Bang, rather. I just always found that relatively fascinating. And I think that that kind of makes the most sense, I guess, out of everything. Like, they're not being purpose like some people believe, like atheists might believe or whatever. I think is a really fucking weird way to look at life, because everything has a purpose from just a common sense standpoint. There's nothing that's purposeless unless the individual looking at it decides not to attribute purpose to it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. I think that actually is the root of what like esoteric thought is. It's the idea of putting meaning, of like looking for meaning, even if it's not there. And maybe you're like, for example, a tarot reading, you know, like it doesn't really matter if you believe that like there's a kind of divinity like guiding your hands when you're shuffling and you pull this card for a reason, or if you just say it's like total coincidence, it's just like total random. It doesn't really matter because you're going to interpret the card the same. And like that's where esotericism comes in. It's like you're like looking for meaning. So I wouldn't say that it's like you're applying meaning that's not there, because the whole point is like, as an esotericist, you believe that the potential for meaning is in everything, which is like the same as it being there. But like you say, it like depends on the viewer, let's say, like putting like a judgment essentially, or like a value on what it is that they're looking at.
Yeah, I definitely I think that holds weight. This is somewhat off of the topic of progress, but I'm curious about your opinion because you're in this same group, and there was a post earlier that really made me question stuff. And it was somebody kind of talking shit about the concept of servitors and egregores because they're kind of thought constructs and kind of completely debasing the value of them. Um, but then completely overlooking the fact that if your imagination can create something that you can gain benefit from, why would you not do that? And how does that make it foolish? What did you see that post? And if you did, what was your take on it?
I didn't see it, but it does. I've thought the same thing like loads of times myself. And I remember a long time ago. Oh, actually, it's funny. There was someone who was on your podcast, and I was speaking to her many years ago. Vanessa, I don't remember her.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, she was. I remember talking to her years ago, and she was talking about how, like, the idea of like setting intentions, which is the same thing as like creating a thought form, and whether or not you decide to like embody that intention with some kind of like autonomy or whatever, however you like you think to perceive it, it's still like your intention like impacting reality. And there was something she was saying about how she felt like, oh, I should just like leave everything like as it is, and not like trying to interfere or whatever. But it's like you're doing it already. Like the whole thing is like your imagination is like putting judgments on everything. Like you're saying, it's like putting values on everything and creating like an experience, which is like all the reality you'll ever know. So in that sense, I would say like, yeah, of course, like that's what self help is. It's it is like chaos magic. You are uh, you're like training your brain to look at things a different way, and that's essentially like your imagination. And then
Mhm.
so of course like it's worthwhile putting up an intention to look at something in a better way, because then it's going to affect your life in a better way. That is, and if we all have that power, and of course like we should all be using it instead of like doing whatever the hell we're doing now, which is creating like an absolute nightmare for everybody.
Right. Yeah, I just thought it was really weird. It's kind of like there's all sorts of evidence that shows that placebo and all this stuff can literally impact things when there is no change beyond the belief structure of the individual. And then this is saying that you can create these things based upon your belief structure to your benefit, but then making fun of people for believing that or for doing that. And it's like, so let me get this straight. You're saying that if people can literally alter reality because of their imagination, they're foolish, but then knowing that you can actively create change by just thinking that you can create change but not doing it, somehow you're smarter than them by not unfucking yourself by the ability to think about it.
Well, do you know what, man? I think actually, like, as far as progress goes, I think that like that's like an example of like a plateau where you like practice something to a point, or you learn about something to a point, or you digest a concept to a point where you feel like you can see through the bullshit, and then you're like you just said, you're enlightened, and then it's like, oh my god, all these, like Homer Simpson, man, like everyone's stupid except me or whatever it's, and you you just like you're like, okay, you end up getting this kind of attitude. I've absolutely got like that attitude towards like certain like beliefs or like views, or even like groups of people
The
in
attitude's
spirituality.
my spirit animal.
But really, like, it is like a real thing. It's a thing you got to watch out for, I think, because every time, like, this guy we were talking about before, he says, oh, how I became enlightened or whatever, it'll take a little bit more progress for this guy, or lady, I don't know, who said, until they realize like, oh, actually, if I think I'm enlightened, I'm definitely not. Like, it's not a thing. And then, you get to those plateaus, and a lot of people just kind of get there and stay there, and that's fine. That's the level that they want to be at. Okay, because there's always going to be more, because as long as you're inhabiting a physical body, like you've got work that you could be doing on yourself.
Yeah, there's literally no end to everything. The other thing I like that I want to tie that whole thing back into progress as well is ask you this: do you think that part of the progress that we have to make as individuals, especially in a world now where we become highly conditioned, fed all sorts of ideology and a lot of things that are incredibly unhelpful, do you think that ultimately progress is reverting back to the ability to use our imagination like we did when we were kids? Because there is this whole sense of innocence that is restored in that. And I guess I want to add this too before I let you answer that question. I find it incredibly fascinating that if you look to a lot of children's movies, they talk about the key component to magic is the ability to believe in order to create stuff. And it's like, it's really, really hokey in some degree when you're in your teens and 20s, or even when you maybe first get reintroduced into these kind of concepts. But then when you really look at it and you really understand that that is the key component in altering things, all of this stuff has always been in plain sight. It's just that part of that conditioning is literally showing it to us and making us think that it's bullshit. Do you think that part of progress is leading us back to this clean slate, or as clean as we can get it?
I definitely think so. You can look at so as well. First, as far as like the whole believing, like being like a huge part of it, I think that that's pretty clear that like you really get into it, and even like sigils or Reiki, or working with crystals or candle magic, or a bracelet that I enchanted the other month to like make sure I always got the window seat on the bus, which by the way had like 95% success rate. That was great. Things like that, it's like because I believed it, like I'm well aware of that. Or maybe I knew that it was going to be like, I get the bus in the morning and it's like an empty bus, so it's going to like always work, so it would have worked without the thing, but like doesn't matter, it worked with it, that's like, and I choose to believe that,
Yeah, like why would you not make life more interesting than not doing it, right? Even if it doesn't work? Like, I don't understand that logic of, that doesn't work, so let me not even try it. Let me just live this boring fucking life where I hate everything. And it's like, dude, you're still doing magic. Like, you're just doing a really shit magic and creating this world that you like don't want to live in. You're progressively making your life worse with the same principle that you could use to uplift yourself out of it, but you're too fucking cool to like.
which actually is the key, and actually leads on perfect to the next point, that I really feel like a lot of the progress that is being made now, like it seems like for lack of a better, less loaded term, millennials seem to really like occultism and witchcraft and magic and astrology, even if it's just like in a tiny little way. Someone who like lights a candle and writes a letter to like whoever like fucked them off that day, burns the letter, and then like releases the whatever. It's fucking witchcraft, man, and I love it. It's like great. Maybe they never like take a next step and have like a million altars to like whoever, doesn't matter. But I really feel like what you're saying about when with like kids or whatever, like it's like imagination is like an escape. You know what I mean? It's a way that kids can escape like the boredom of school or whatever. I don't know about you, man, but I was always looking out the window, like in school, just like thinking about I don't even know what, But the thing is, it was kind of boring, and you grow up, and then you're in school and you got homework, and then you finish school and you got like university, and then you finish university, you got like work for the rest of your life, and it's like it's not interesting either. And I'm starting to think that that's maybe the kind of progress that we're doing, that we've made, has it, like you're just saying, people refusing to believe in like magic, let's say, and it's kind of created a really like dull world, and it's like you can quantify everything, like if you look up like on YouTube, like what is love, or like the science of love, there's like videos of like scientists have been like reducing like the most like fantastic experience of all time, like falling in love. They've like reduced it to like, oh, it's a bunch of chemicals, and it's just the same as like when you're on cocaine or whatever. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear like it's because like two star-crossed lovers, and then they realize I want the whole story. It's way better. And I think that people are kind of striving for that, and that's what's driven people back into magic, and I think that can only be a good thing, just more people, even if it's just people like rediscovering the wonder, that's going to feed into like the collective unconscious, that's going to like make the world objectively just full of more wonder.
Bringing up kind of the whole science thing, I guess one of my next questions would be, do you think that part of progress is sometimes going the wrong direction, so then it can re-emphasize the importance of certain things that might have been left by the wayside?
Definitely. I'll give you a really good example of like progress. Like, so in chaos magic, the whole thing with the half-peeled orange, like if anyone is not familiar, it's essentially that there's a kind of game that it's kind of like a kind of like an entrance exam or whatever. If you can do this, then you're officially like a chaos, like a chaot, I don't know how to pronounce that, but a chaote. Anyway, a chaos magic practitioner, wily chaote. So essentially, yeah, the idea is that you pick an object, and it's usually a half-peeled orange, which is like oranges are everywhere, so there's lots of possibility. But the half-peeled part is like specific enough that when it comes up, you can be like, that was the magic. So it's a thing that you decide to manifest a half-peeled orange into your conscious reality, and you can use any techniques you want, like whatsoever, to do it. And I did it, and it took like 6 turns or whatever. And every time I started off general, I was just like made a sigil for, I'll manifest a half-peeled orange into my life, and then like nothing happened, and I was like, I didn't put a time thing, so I was like, okay, so like, and also it was like lusting so hard after this like result, I was like, every time there was like an orange, I was like looking at them all like, oh no, they both all peel, and it kind of like just like progress, because I just got better because I had to like refine it. And the second last one, the one right before the one that worked, I was like, okay, I will manifest a half-peeled orange, blah, blah, blah. And I put like a specific like time frame on it. And I was walking around like a shopping center here in Montevideo, where I am. And there was, I couldn't believe it, man. There was like this barbecue grill that was like orange, and the cover, like this texture was all like knobbly, like an orange. And it was like open, like a little bit. And I was like, I was like, literally in the middle of the thing, I was like, that is so asinine. My girlfriend was like, what? And I was like, the universe is telling me that I forgot to like specify it was supposed to be like a fruit, not just like an orange. And I was like, fuck you, like really? And then, I was like, okay, fine. Next time I did it, I was like so specific, and it happened. You know what I mean? So that's like progress. And like now, like that's, and I always like take notes, like Carly says, like a magical diary and stuff to note down exactly what I did. And now I'm like, okay, that worked, and now whatever I want to manifest next, it's like I'll use the exact same thing to do it. So that's like a good example of progress. But to answer your question before about things being left out, I think that's it. It's like you try something, it doesn't work, and then you kind of have to figure out like how to fill in the gaps. You know what I mean? To like get you to where you thought you were in the first place. That you weren't yet. And I think that in a way, like with yoga, for example, I know like the work I have to do, if I want to like get there, and sometimes, I wouldn't have known that work if I hadn't tried to like reach my toes. In a way, I think you get the same thing with anything you want to make progress in. You've got to try it first of all, and then you realize like how bad you are at it or how good you are. But in either case, where the improvement can be made. And you see the same thing as well, in like any kind of competition, you get people who are like on top of the world, and they never stay there forever because they don't have anyone to like challenge themselves against who can like help them identify those gaps. And I think that's like the danger of, I don't know, like boxers or martial artists or whatever who are like undefeated, like the longer that goes on, the more likely it is that streak's going to break because other people are going to identify their weaknesses, and they're not going to be able to see them themselves.
Now, with that analogy, it actually ties in really good to my next question. Do you think that in order for both science and kind of just metaphysics as a broad term to grow and kind of refine themselves, that they actually need to respect each other more so? So then there is that kind of competitive edge to help other people spot the gaps within it, like as a form of progress for both of them.
I think so. I think that people, so with like science, like because they're looking at reality from a different perspective. But science is based on the idea that there is a subjective. I always fuck that up. Let's
Objective.
But I don't, man. That's the only 2 words I like fuck up, like in the whole English language. Anyway, the only 2, because shit, there we go. Let's talk about ego. Anyway, like no, I always get those wrong. So anyway, I'm just gonna say personal and impersonal. Science is based on the idea that there is like an impersonal reality, that like you can just say that something is just, that's a fact. It's a fact for everybody. It doesn't matter like what you want to say about it. And magic and metaphysics, let's stick with your thing, metaphysics, are completely like the opposite. It's like the whole thing is, for example, with my my bracelet that I enchanted, about the bus seats. You know, someone will say, "Ah, how the hell are you going to say that that's because of that?" It's like, because I just decided that's like the reason, you know, that I was always sitting at the window. And I think that that's what's maybe kind of irreconcilable. And you get to, you know, the whole like alternative facts or like fake news and all that kind of stuff is a result of the same thing that metaphysics is born out of. You know, it's like, you know, what's true for me is true for me. You know, I don't honestly care if it's true for you or not, you know. So like that's going to be hard to like properly reconcile both those things. But I think like certainly just respecting these things, you know, and but like reconciling, and I think might be harder than that. But you know, you can, you know, I'm able to hold like both things in my mind at once, you know, like. But what I try and do is the whole point about not like you know, let's say the kind of like law of attraction kind of thing about like, you know, don't speak about bad stuff, because, you know, the more you say like, oh, you know, I'm so angry, then the more you're just going to be angry, you know, and it's just not going to go away, and it's more productive to like work on whatever. But instead of that, I'm just like, instead of thinking, let's not say I'm angry, I'm like, I'll say it, and I'll be like, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm being intentional about it. I'm like, yes, like I am angry, and I'm like encouraging that, you know, and it's like, just take responsibility for it, you know. So like I'm well aware of like the subjective and the objective. See, it doesn't matter because I just said them both back to back. Doesn't matter which one was which.
You still did it wrong. You still did it wrong. In my reality, at least.
So, but that's it, right? I can say that, you know, like France is a country in Europe, and I'm like, that's not my opinion. That's just a fact. So I believe that those like just facts just exist, but also like I don't believe in a objective reality. Nailed it. At the same
Hey, there
time,
you go.
yeah, like at the same time, like they don't make sense together, but in my subjective reality they actually do. Like,
By definition, objective too is actually impossible because it's the ability to view something out of the context of anything else. And since we're immersed in reality, it's physically impossible to view anything separate from anything else it's related to. So it's really like a bullshit argument for science, anyhow, that they're objective. And then from the magical standpoint, if everything operates on the premise of belief and they're believing that this other force doesn't exist, then they're not going to get results. So by proxy, they're fighting an argument they can never prove. But there's also a lot of science that when people believe in it, they get results that validate it, but it doesn't hold up to the other rigors that other people operate under. My big thing is this: if science could just admit that from like using rational thinking, we're human, we have limited ability to perceive what's going on in the universe. Is it just say, is it possible that there is some other force, at least one other force in all the observable world or universe that we haven't figured or haven't noticed or haven't understood? Just one. And without a doubt, there has to be at least one. So then it opens this whole door, and then the whole argument of there not being any validity to that stuff falls by the wayside. But it goes into, I mean, one aspect of it, I guess, is there's a lot of money invested in the worldview as it is. So there's not really a lot of money in having to completely restructure everything and make the progress of saying there's some unspoken force that we have not accounted for. And if other people, I mean, this is more conspiracy stuff, but if other people made the progress that people progressed to a point where we all understood that there is this force that we could bend to our will and not have our subconsciouses filtered with limiting beliefs that keep us prisoner, then the power structure would largely be in a pretty shitty spot. So it's a lot easier to keep science in place because then it's all hard facts. And it's interesting too. This is the last thing I'll say, that I'll shut up for a bit, is science is literally like the exoteric, where it's the tangible thing that you can see. And then there's the whole esoteric concept behind it, which is all of these other metaphysical things that have validity and you can actively work with it, but you have to step out on your disbelief and try it for yourself and not rely on the evidence. So they're almost like two ends of the same spectrum, two polar opposites, but finding a unity of both of them is going to be the most solid. Everything in the middle, Michael. Or whatever the fuck you said earlier. It's all about the middle, man.
But we spoke about the balancing before last time.
But you said something earlier how people will reduce stuff down to like that one phrase and miss all the nuances. I was trying to rub off all my nuances and just get it down to a t-shirt saying
it's all in the middle. Well, okay, like progress, like with science, there's like very clear like progress being made across like science, technology, understanding everything. Wasn't that long ago that like Westerners didn't know like what like zero was? That was like a concept that like you couldn't explain to someone, and then look at like like we're doing this like a video call, like all these like futuristic films and stuff. We're like, oh, in the future they're all going to have like video phones, and then it happened, and it was like so normal that no one even fucking uses it. Like no one even uses like a telephone call. Everyone sends like voice notes or texts or whatever, like mad, like that's where we've got to. But I can call, so I'm down here in Uruguay, and I can phone my mum in Scotland, like while I'm just like walking around the street, like I don't even need like to be in a house, and I can phone her for free, basically,
Mm-hmm.
like that's mad. And the progress that's been made, like maybe in like spiritual practices, is maybe it's not been as like noticeably like maybe like for example John Dee, like Mr. Astrologer for Queen Elizabeth I, like Nokia, he was like
Nokia alphabet and all that stuff too,
yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. Like was it that, or was it it doesn't matter. Yeah, he was like talking to angels and like divining with angels and like with pendulums, and he was like a master astrologer and all this stuff. And I like the amount of progress that's been made in that stuff since like in the last 500 years. Like I don't think it can really hold a candle to the progress that's been made like in the collective, like overall on the planet in technology and stuff like that in that time. But if anything, that's because it's not because of that stuff, like mysticism or whatever being like archaic and being like primitive. It's because it was like fucking highly like developed, like, and it has been for a long time, and it's like technology was like not that long ago people didn't know what electricity was. They just like had no idea, and now like society would collapse like if you took the electricity away, I forgot where I was going. But essentially, maybe that with science, it's, I think a lot of people who are interested in metaphysics or spirituality, they'll grab onto something scientific or something that sounds scientific even, that kind of validates their worldview without really understanding it. And I'm 100% guilty of that myself. I'll use like the double slit experiment, things like that, like to talk about like how reality is like created by our perception and things like this. But it really does seem like science, after being like so sure of itself in its objective facts, is now like when we get to, and again, like I'm just grabbing on something, I'm just saying exactly what I just said, but like it seems like a lot of people will grab onto like quantum mechanics and look at like, okay, if you go subatomic, like none of these laws apply anymore, so everything's just like nuts, and I'm sure like eventually there'll be an explanation for it. But the thing is, like, that's all progress, and I think that maybe, damn, I completely forgot where my conclusion was, where I was going. But essentially, I don't remember, I should shut up. But no, that it seems like science is headed towards like metaphysics. It seems like that's kind of where it's going. Like, the Higgs boson or whatever, or like the benefits of meditation and also yoga and Tai Chi and stuff, and how it basically just makes you like healthier, like sitting and just like breathing makes you healthier. And like what I mentioned, like as far from being primitive, like people have been meditating for thousands of years, like the monks or whatever on mounts, don't know what, like have been 4,000 years ago. It's not like they were like savages or whatever. They were like geniuses, like they knew more than like scientists know today, And so maybe that's the kind of like part of respect that's maybe missing from like more scientific, rational based minds that is maybe a part of metaphysics. And now it's my turn to shut up for a while. So.
Yeah, kind of what I got from what you were saying is spirituality or like the metaphysics was already pretty much refined to its purest. It was just people learning how to access it. So there's not really any, it's just tapping into what's already there. So there's not necessarily the need to develop it. It's developing ourselves so we can fine tune our personal receiver and ability to utilize it. But the other aspect is with science is this material technology that actually has to be created. One of the things that I find is fascinating, though, is a lot of the people who were involved in science, a lot of the earlier science or stuff that really shaped a lot of the stuff that we have now. In my understanding, and I don't think this is across the board, but enough of them were involved in kind of metaphysics and occult stuff to take note of it. And people can do their own research. I'm not a fucking reference dictionary. But there has to be something to that in some degree. A lot of these people also studied various religions, all of this stuff. And the other point, tying it back into the concept of imagination and getting back to imagination kind of being progress and where we need to get back to this cleaning of the slate. A lot of technology also came directly from utilization of imagination through science fiction or various things like that. So it's accessing this intangible concept, harnessing that intangible concept, and then quote unquote manifesting it into the real world. But it's operating on all these esoteric and metaphysic principles, but science is kind of too snooty to really acknowledge that. And there are other components to it as well. I shouldn't reduce it all to that, but there's a lot more going on, I think, than what people will understand. But I do agree with you that as we progress, it is moving more towards metaphysics. And this is just kind of like what I'd like to see happen. But have you ever seen the, this is kind of going to be an interesting way to end the discussion. Have you ever seen the second Avatar, not The Last Airbender, but The Legend of Korra?
I haven't seen any of them, man.
This conversation's over. But anyhow, it takes 100 years. Takes place 100 years after the original Avatar series, and they have all of these different technologies that are actually powered by these people's ability to interact with the elements. So it's really kind of like using magical technologies to function in the world, which is an incredibly interesting concept. And I think that actually is a potential in some way, maybe not obviously to the extreme that it is in that cartoon, but I think that there's something to learning how to harness these metaphysics in a way. And I honestly think that's what would lead us to a sustainable lifestyle more so, is learning how to live in harmony with nature, because that's the main thing about metaphysics too. While technology is kind of this human creation, so it's a byproduct of nature, metaphysics in itself is like natural law, and learning to harness it and live in harmony with that would reduce a lot of the problems. Like that's the ultimate progress. Do magic, it's green. That's my campaign slogan for 2020 when I run for president.
Well, you're running for president. You're running for president 2020. Oh my God!
Nah.
Announced on the podcast. Unbelievable.
Dude, you can be my. We'll find a way to make you my vice president.
Can you be a vice? That's not sorry. But I wanted to say, like precisely like what you're saying. You know, it needs to be like move away from the idea of like, oh, the tree huggers or whatever, you know, and like that's something to like laugh about and be like, well, actually, yes, maybe we all should like, you know, hug a tree once in a while, you know, or plant a tree, or 100%, man. And I think that a lot of that stuff is, you can look at like, talk about progress, like progress in, as we went way into like rationalism, we just tore down all the trees and just put up like concrete stuff instead. And you know, like just that's a pretty obvious thing. Of course, like what's happening just now, like in the rainforest is like another example. You know, just industry, just like man-made industry, just like flattening the earth, you know, and just like putting up concrete instead, and it's not going to sustain us, man. Like we're going to have to like sort that out once in a while. And the last thing I want to say as well, but is you can in the whole science and metaphysics thing, like Nikola Tesla is generally looked at as like for people who idolize like Tyler Durden from like Fight Club and the guy in Clockwork Orange and like the Joker, Heath Ledger's the Joker and stuff. For all those people, certainly like Nikola Tesla is like Mr. Science and he's like the genius. But at the same time, like I've read that he died believing that his only friend was like a pigeon with like laser eyes who would like talk to him and stuff. And I'm like, so you're saying that this guy did all this unbelievable stuff, and you're like, and like that's evidence that everyone was like stupid except him. But at the same time, you're not prepared to believe that he could like communicate with a pigeon. You know what I mean? It's like there is like some kind of like limiting thing on what people think is just like universally possible. But you know what? Maybe like for this crazy scientist who believed he could like do this stuff and just did it, maybe he actually was like talking to a pigeon with laser eyes, and like that's magic, man. And I'm not going to take that away from Mr. Tesla.
Yeah, that's the thing that's super funny, man. People think like that they're so fucking smart. People do this all the time. Oh man, the ancients were stupid, man. And here they are like with truck nuts on their car. Well, the ancients were like charting the progression of the stars. And these people don't even know what day it is without using a calendar on their iPhone. Yeah, man, the ancients were dumb. You know so much more, Johnny Truck Nuts. Yeah, that does blow my mind how people just completely dismiss stuff based upon their own limited beliefs and not understanding that their beliefs are kind of a prison in some ways. One thing that I do have to say about the whole hippie concept, and this is probably not going to go over well. Well, the general premise of
what a way to like preface your thing,
right? The general premise of a lot of hippie beliefs, I do agree with. There's so much what's the word I'm looking for to be somewhat tactful about this.
Don't worry about that, man. Just go for it.
There's a lot of conflicting belief structures and a lot of bullshit that they completely miss because they're too high on DMT to really understand. And one of those things, for example, would be we had talked about Burning Man before we started recording, and a lot of these people are all about saving the environment, but at the same time they spend all of this money to take this pilgrimage to Burning Man, bring all of this different stuff in, spend all this money on gas, all this money on electricity, just to give them this indulgent experience of living in something that isn't a city, and it's completely not healthy for the environment, but yet they do that. Or even like marijuana, growing pot, although there is a lot of benefits for it, a lot of the indoor grow ops are completely unsustainable, draw huge amounts of resources, take all sorts of water. Then if you get into the fertilizer aspect of it, unless it's organic, it's incredibly toxic for the soil. Like there's a lot of damaging stuff that is completely overlooked because that ideology of being a hippie is very popular and mainstream, but the actual core tenets of respecting the earth and being logical is completely missed because people are too fucked up and trying to be trendy.
Sure. I mean, I can see a lot. There's some things like with the whole. I was so like this week I've been thinking about this a lot. Like the whole, let's say like like I'm the reason I'm not going to say this word, well, postmodern. That's what I was looking for, because like this week my girlfriend's sick of hearing this word because I've been going about postmodernism all week, but she's not on the podcast and this isn't coming out for a while. So by the time she listens to it, she won't be sick of it.
Yeah, you so anyway. just accidentally slip it in.
Excuse me about the cough there. Okay, so the whole postmodern idea about like the objective is like entirely dependent on the individual, right? I'm still sidestepping those two words I confuse. Anyway, that whole thing is best evidenced in, for example, if there's someone you really like some public figure, right? And I tell you something bad about them, So, for example, I'll just give you an example. The Bolivian president, Evo Morales, I think he's great, right? And I was speaking to someone, and they were just like, "Oh, did you know like the whole Amazon thing was like Evo Morales like started?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And the fire, it's not like the planting of the trees. And he was like, he sent me this like thing, and I was like, and my first reaction was like to Google something for myself that was gonna like agree with me. You know, I wasn't interested in hearing like another point of view. You know, and the thing with like hippies or whatever, like the quote unquote hippies, like the whole save the planet kind of thing, which is like really important. Like the thing that makes sense to me, the thing I've read, because maybe I just take it because I agree with it. If it's my whole thing, is like the single greatest thing you can do to like save the planet is to stop eating meat, like to stop feeding into, apart from the meat industry, like needing land to raise cows and soy and stuff like that. The cows themselves, like far an absolute beast, and like that's not healthy at all. So like, doesn't matter if you raise the cows yourself or whatever, it's still, and that's even apart from the, the compassion element and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is like that people are just going to pick whatever thing they want, and I just realized it has nothing to do with progress. But I'll try and drive it right back around. So thinking about the whole Burning Man thing, like there's something to be said for like the ceremony of it as well. I think that a big part of why magic works, certainly for me, is because, well, like you're saying about belief, is because I feel like it's not just belief. It's like I feel like I'm doing magic at the time. I'll like light a bunch of candles, and I'll wear like a dressing gown I've got, just because it's got a hood and it's black. I'll put that on, and it's like, and then it makes me like I'm in the moment or whatever, and that gives it like more power, and things like that. And I think that for a lot of people, you'll know yourself as like a tarot reader. A lot of people, if you offer stuff for free, like people don't fucking appreciate it. Like, you'll like write them 1,000 words reading, and people will be like, like throwaway advice, and they'll like go on YouTube and look for another one, But if they like pay for something, it's like it's worth something, and then they'll be like, oh, I fucking paid for this, it's like good advice, I'm gonna like pay attention, and maybe that's the thing about Burning Man, people like going for like a big group experience, and like it because it costs so much, I actually don't know how much it costs, but like something astronomical probably, but because they invest that much in it, like literal money, like they really like take it on, and like really like mean something to them, because it's part of like getting into the ceremonial, I don't know, current of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I can respect that. I mean, I'm not going to be pedantic and go through it and debate everything. I'll let you have the last word on that. That's fucking progress for me, man. That's like the ultimate progress of me just letting it be where it is and letting you have your opinion and me have mine about it. But fuck Burning Man. No. Oh man, I'm right back to like, I'm coming back as an ant in my next life. I got to start this whole cycle all over again.
Well, John, I wanted to ask you about like personal progress, about exactly that kind of stuff. I know it's something that we both kind of struggle with, but is this all like still episode 1, or are you going to cut it in half?
Oh yeah, I'm just going to do it as one. I'm just going to ease it into everything and not make it difficult on myself. So we'll just do one.
Just ease it in.
Yeah, just ease it in. Unless you think we should pause it and do it as 2 separate ones.
No, that's cool. But I wanted to ask you about that, because I know that both of us struggle with like ego, and it comes from us like being a part of like, especially Facebook groups, where we took it on ourselves to learn a skill. I think for both of us it started with like tarot, as well as like digesting all this metaphysical philosophy, let's say, that we noticed or like felt. There we go. There it is. But felt. that was accidental. Okay, so oh my God. So we perceived that we had made like progress, and that we were becoming I don't know, like features, in this like community, like online. And we both kind of felt that we'd eventually kind of outgrown it and everything, and now like we like go back, and interact with people who are just getting started in spirituality. And I think both of us tend to have something of a struggle with our egos in that sense, because it's, you know, when someone's asking like, oh, you know, for example, if someone says like, what happens when I die? And, you know, for me, it's like, man, like I've been thinking about that for years. Like, I can't believe you're, you know, there's a part of me that's like, I can't believe you're just like starting with that. Or someone's like, hey, do you believe in God? And I'm like, you think that's like a deep question? Like, that's unbelievable. Like, that's not even the right question. You know, like, what is the nature of divinity? It's a far better question. You know, things like that come into my head, you know, and that's something that I've been like wrestling with and trying to work on and make progress in with like varying degrees of success. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Cessna, if you, if you, if you, what's your, I mean, what's your current like status with all that stuff, and what kind of progress have you actually like seen yourself make?
I'm really getting better at just letting people be where they're at times. I've made a lot of progress in that from when I rejoined the one group more recently. And I mean, even doing like tarot readings in exchange for people giving me legitimate reviews and stuff like that, interacting with people who are maybe at a different leg of their journey, um, rehumanizing those people and
Mm,
understanding that being a mentor in that capacity is actually something I should take with more care and respect and gratitude. And I'm kind of getting over my temper tantrum of not having many people to talk to about this stuff, because it turns out everybody who pursues this past a certain standpoint has their own opinion anyhow. So when you have
mhm,
a conversation, most of the time, I can't say all the time, it resolves back to just kind of doubling down on your own beliefs. A lot of times, though, you might get a new piece of information. You can take a different way. It's just a lonely road at the end of the day, no
yeah,
matter um, where you are. And the further you progress with this, the lonelier it's going to get, I feel, and it's going to be more and more isolating. So accepting that, and then understanding that part of that is helping people. Also, like, I mentor somebody in my outside life as well, who's in the 12-step program I'm in. So learning to be compassionate for him in the situation of him asking questions that now seem fucking dumb to me, but understanding that I was there at one point allows me to help somebody else navigate through it. And the main thing is, I guess, is just like looking at the humanity of the individual, and not
mhm,
this thought form that I have of these people, not seeing this like created fictitious element, but the individual nuances of that person, like
mhm.
the esoteric element rather than the exoteric. This is just some jack off in a spiritual group who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah, well, that's it. And a lot of the times, I enjoy, actually really enjoy doing like astrology or tarot or whatever it might be with someone who's like new to the whole thing, because like it's so exciting, man. I remember when it was just like, you know, as soon as like you take off the limiting belief or whatever, you just like open Pandora's box, like whatever it is, like some kind of event or experience, and you're like, oh fuck, like I'm just gonna dive into all this stuff and like see what sticks. You know, I remember that, and it was like so exhilarating. So having the opportunity to like sit with someone for an hour or like 2 hours, whatever, and like talk about this stuff and just like blow their mind. Like I love doing that. Like, it's so much fun. You know, both of us get loads out of it, but I am like aware as well that like it does like feed this like ego that I've got, that like this person's, I'll say something that it's like not that like profound to me, or like just because I'm again, like just because like it's something that I'm like, you know, used to, and I've heard it a million times, and I've like digested this idea for a long time, and I'll say it and they'll just be like, oh my god, that's so true, like I can't believe that, that's just like so spot on. And I'm like, that's right. Like, you know who to call when you want like the esoteric answers or whatever, you know. But I always try and what I've actually actively tried to do to try and like beat this is to try and spend more time in like circles where I know that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, you know. And it's like kind of hard to find, certainly online on Facebook, you know, it's hard to find like groups like that where people like really know their shit and are talking about it at a level where you're just kind of lost. It's really hard to find that. So I think you kind of have to like go and join like a Theosophical Society or like the Rosicrucians or something, or just read books. But like you say, it's kind of hard to just get kind of lonely, because maybe you can't find someone who's going to read the same book, as you.
Yeah, I definitely think that I struggle with the ego thing in the sense that I don't think that ego is intrinsically bad. I think that ego's gotten a bad rap, and it's kind of one of those buzzwords that's thrown around in our culture a lot. And oftentimes it's a scapegoat for the individual not taking accountability for their own fucked up shit. Ego absolutely has a purpose and it has some good benefits. It's getting into a healthier relationship with it. And I think this whole concept of having to be humble and always viewing yourself as less than and not being able to pat yourself on the back is actually problematic. But I do agree that finding other people that you can surround yourself with that can kind of keep you from that can keep your ego more balanced is helpful. But it becomes lonely, and even if you go into a lot of these groups, people are always going to be at different levels of understanding. But there is, for me, this is again using a 12-step analogy, I guess. There's a sense of humility that comes into play by working with people that are at the beginning of their journey, because then it allows me to access back where I was at the beginning. Like if I've gone to a rehab facility or I talk to somebody who only has a couple days clean or whatever, I can get deeply in touch with the emotions and thoughts and feelings associated with that part of everything. And if I'm doing that within the context of reading tarot or helping somebody navigate through a problem, there's that sense of humility there as well, where there's a connection to, as long as they're not like a total fucking asshole, then I might have some trouble with it. But the other aspect of it too is sometimes if I'm doing readings for people that maybe, I'm trying to think of how to word this right, because spiritual development isn't linear, and people can be advanced in one area where you can relate to them completely, and then not advanced at all in other areas where you don't relate. But when that comes up, there's also this level of look at the progress I've made because I see the progress reflected in this individual, and then you can honor that in this other person, and then it allows you to honor it in yourself. But it's weird, like really diving into a lot of that. Like, I'm glad that you started the conversation off with the concept of physical measurable progress, because that's easy. But as far as the internal progress of emotional development and perception of the outside world, that can be a lot more different, and it's very difficult to put into words. I feel like just like most of the esoteric or metaphysical experience, there's lots of words that you can use to create like a loose frame of it, but it doesn't really hold the actual thing. It goes into the concept of the map is not the territory. You can only know the territory by being present in it yourself. And I think that's one of the largest areas of progress, which is why it's difficult to find people that understand it, because it goes, this is like my little bow on everything, I guess. It goes into the fact that this experience is subjective. So the subjective way that I experience reality makes it impossible for me to really have a deeper connection with other people outside of the framework aspect of everything. So it really is just, we can compare notes, but the giraffe you drew in your notes is going to look different from the giraffe I drew, I guess, is where I'll leave it at.
I think that's great, man. Everything you just said, what you just said about like mentoring people, I wanted to ask you about that. So from what I understood is like that when you're mentoring with someone who's at the beginning of their journey in the 12-step program, it's like that's how you realize the progress you've made, because you can't really see it otherwise, because it's not like linear and you can't measure it like in numbers the same way that you can like a business or whatever. Right. So what's that like? Like, and I want to say, like, if you can't just measure it with like numbers and stuff, like how do you actually see the progress that you've made through other people? Like, what kind of, is it habits or like mentality or what kind of thing?
All of those things really. So you do like a daily inventory, so you can see some progress in the daily inventory and seeing how you you've changed behavior. But like, for example, for me, looking back on people, looking back at where I was, like my clean date was actually yesterday. So I just celebrated 3 years. So looking back
Congrats,
at where I
man.
was, oh, thanks, dude. Looking back at where I was 3 years ago and touching into seeing that in the newcomer is seeing that emotional chaos, seeing that rock bottom, seeing that horror, seeing the consequences of their action, not knowing if they're going to make it, not really understanding any of what goes into changing your life or anything like that, like reconnecting with that. And the progress in that is measured by, I now have 3 years clean. So there is like tangible stuff in there, but then it's also, how do I feel? I feel very connected with my life. I'm happier than I've ever been. There's also tangible results in the fact that I've changed habits, and I don't take mental health medication anymore, which I did 3 years ago. I no longer smoke cigarettes. So you can look at changed behaviors, but then all those behaviors also change the way that you perceive reality and how your thought process works. So like really interacting with people in that concept is incredibly, it's fucking mind blowing, I guess, is the simple aspect of it. And even within the 12-step stuff, like the progress and the ability to share that progress with other people is baked in there, in the sense that the 12th step is, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we continue to carry this message to addicts who still suffer and practice these principles in all our affairs. So it's essentially saying, I've made all of this progress. Now, in order to keep what I have to give it to other people and also display it within my actions in everything that I do. And then that kind of, the analogy I like to use is, we talk about this downward spiral, and it keeps getting tighter and tighter where shit gets more and more fucked up. Well, the step process is helping you kind of unwind that spiral till you get into this upward spiral. And then that's kind of what the 12th step is, just feeding into the like the momentum of that upward spiral. Yeah.
That's cool. And so it seems like part of the progress that you have to make in it, it's like part of the progress that you make, let's say it's that have to make in a 12-step program, is mentoring other people, right? Like you get a stage where the only real way that you can make this is, let me know if I'm putting like words out there that don't fit, but that you, in order for you to make any more progress, you have to actually like bring other people, because that's the only way you can really make any progress or learn. Is that about right? Like for you to like keep improving, you have to like run through like and do like the earlier steps again, but from a different perspective, like the perspective of a teacher.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's it. And then also, like, from taking somebody through the steps, their experience of going through it can actually give you different information, because they have a different subjective viewpoint. And like I had said, well, it doesn't completely change your foundation. You can assimilate some of their viewpoint into it, and then it helps build a more solid foundation. It's a really, really fascinating process, and there's like this whole esoteric component to 12 steps that I don't think most people understand. And a lot of those people were actually affiliated with really kind of metaphysical sects of Christianity or Catholicism or whatever as well. Like there's a lot of esoteric roots associated with that whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting, because that's kind of what I was getting at before, with like the progress that we saw in ourselves with our like spiritual practices as well, you know, like with tarot and all this kind of stuff. And you know, new people joined like the community or whatever, and it became evident that for us, and I think I said this to you last time, and you said it to me today as well, maybe while we were recording, maybe before, that stepping like with kind of Facebook groups that tend to be people of a mixed level, a lot of the real like benefit you can get after you've digested like the kind of initial key concepts of, you know, esotericism. Of course, there's more stuff you can learn, but you know, I don't know about you, but I've noticed that unless it's like a technique book or a book about like how to do this, or if it's like a particular practice or something like that, then it's going to be the same core concepts like presented again, you know, and you can really like the way that it's said, but a lot of it's the same stuff, you know, and it's like that, you know, it's great, and I love reading it, and I'll just keep reading it forever. But the real benefit is when you can like find people, like I'm saying, like astrology clients or tarot clients, whatever, who aren't new to this stuff, you know, and for them it's like mind blowing, and you get to like explain to them and like see their mind get blown, and you hear their story, and that feeds into your thing as well, and that's progress, because it's just more perspective, you know, because the more different perspectives you can, well, actually, the more perspectives that you can add to the equation, the closer you get to like unity, because that's what unity is. It's the accumulation of all perspectives. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it ties back into the whole concept. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, finish your thought.
No, I was finished.
It goes back into that whole aspect of Kabbalah where it talks about lighting the spark within other people and then bringing that spark back to that one key spark. So mentorship really is operating on that same principle. I think the other benefit of it, though, too, really is that you learn more about your understanding. And I mean, the best students actually are teachers, and the best way to remember best way to learn is to teach it too. So, plus, although there's like, again, this simple esoteric concept of the words like stay in the middle or whatever it is, there's that whole esoteric thing where when you begin to really go in and kind of look behind the words, there's no end to how deep that actually goes and what that actually means. So there's the placeholder of those words, which is really cliche and shitty, but what that phrase actually means and how it relates to a lot of stuff, it's infinite as to what you can gain from it. And that's like the one thing where I'm tripping up a lot now, like not tripping up in a bad way, but just kind of getting mind blown in how expansive stuff is, and really understanding that for a lot of this stuff there is no limit to where it will actually take you. So it's kind of confronting infinity in like this Carlos Castaneda sense of the way, and it's a pretty heavy thing to actually understand.
Well, okay, so something I think it's kind of related. It's all related to progress anyway. With like learning, you know, it's, first of all, I've always known that you're a very like objectives and goals driven person, because a lot of the time I'll see you post like on Facebook periodically about like there was something, was it last year you realized that by like August you'd like smashed all the goals you set for the year or something. And then I remember you were like, I guess like I'm going to have to use this leftover time to like think about how I can be like way more, never mind, I think you said ambitious, but I was thinking at the time, I was like, sounds like actually more realistic next year about like what you can achieve. Never mind like ambitious, you know, because like realistic, because normally realistic is like a more conservative estimate, but in your case it's like you were too conservative, you know, so you weren't realistic enough. But in any case, it seems like because of that, you're also the kind of person who likes learning. You don't like always, and I think that obviously learning is tied, it's the same thing as progress, you know, when you learn something, you make progress in it. And I wanted to ask, like, because for me in this stage of my life, like I'm 29 and I've learned a bunch of stuff, you know, like I've tried to learn different things. I've like been to university, I've like learned a language, like I've, you know, done loads of different stuff. And by this point, I'm pretty familiar with like the way that I like to learn stuff. Like I usually like to like kind of find a way to digest like the key concepts of something, and then just like practice it. You know, I don't do well if I like just like study the concepts too much. I like get the basics, and I'm like, okay, cool, let's just start doing it. You know, and I learn by doing. You know, it's the same with language, same with astrology. You know, I got the basics down, then I was just like started doing like free like natal chart readings. You know, and I just like, you know, I just learned loads just by doing those. You know, and the same with tarot and everything else. So, in your case, like, do you like do you know like how you learn, like, and do you apply it the same way across the board, or does it depend on like what you're learning?
I'm definitely more of a visual or a hands-on learner, but like with tarot specifically, I learned originally by going through a book and kind of trying to memorize stuff to the best of my ability, which worked at one stage. Then the next stage of it was learning to just kind of go off at the cards and like look at the symbols and all of that stuff, which was one stage. Then it was kind of incorporating a little bit of both things. And now I'm going through and doing a more formal study of things again, with deeper understanding and kind of expanding upon things. So there's all sorts of different ways that I like to learn. And I think that that's one of the benefits that I have. Like, so real quick, I had told you that like I got the autism spectrum diagnosis. So actually one of the things that really works in my favor is the fact that like I'm like knowledge obsessed. And I like to focus in on specific things. And because I only like specific things, I only like to research or put attention towards those. So like it's very easy for me to sit there and really become focused on that, to study it, to learn as much as I can, to apply it. And now learning with that condition, learning what that means, and then learning how to navigate it and channel it for my benefit, it's actually going to be an incredible asset. So that makes sense. Did that answer your question or no?
No, it does. Yeah, no, just it's interesting for me as well, like how, because I know how I learn. So because I've done the same learning process with different things, I measure my own progress, like in my own way. You know what I mean? And it's almost like I'm like, listen, don't like, oh, I've been doing this for like 3 months. I was like, oh yeah, let me see. And I'm like, no, because you don't understand like where I am, like on the learning curve that I've written for myself. You know what I mean? It's like you're not going to like see it the way that I see it, because I know like where it is relative to where I'm going or whatever, and I know about that, like about measuring progress and like linear and like non-linear things, I think I kind of shy away from like linear like measuring of things for that reason, because then it becomes, oh my god, I just had a huge epiphany. It's because then it becomes more objective if it's like that, and I don't like the measuring of my own progress. I don't like to do that in like in a objective way, because I don't think that it actually is objective, or maybe it's the other way around.
I think you use it right. Objective implies that there's one formal way to do it. Subjective is based upon the individual.
No, this time I was sure I got the objective subjective thing right. What I meant is like that I don't actually know, and I've just realized this right now as I'm speaking. I don't know if it's me shying away from linear learning processes or learning techniques, because I don't want my progress to be able to be measured in that way, because then it stops being like my opinion based. I don't know. Maybe that's not as profound to everyone else.
Yeah, it didn't do anything for me. It didn't tingle my bits. One of the things I would say though, because I'm making this transition now in my own life, is kind of switching how I approach my own learning stuff, in the sense that like having been very objective driven and all this stuff, it actually made me really miserable. So switching to this other thing of being more chill about stuff, which is something that I have to do with understanding some of my own things I have going on mentally. But it's been a completely different experience in a good way. So one of the things that might benefit you is just trying what's the opposite of your regular learning style, just to see kind of how that works for you, because there might be things that you can pick up from that that you might not pick up otherwise.
Well, that's actually really, really poignant. And I've just realized as you were saying that also that I don't, so for example, like languages or whatever, I've always been like really keen on learning languages. And right now I'm wanting to do like a Spanish exam at level C2, which is like the highest one you can do as like a foreign, like as your second language. And then I'm like, cool, because I want to finish learning a language. Once I get like an exam certificate, I'm never going to bother like trying to get to that level again. It's just going to be something I just do like for fun. But I have like a particular way that I like going through like a language to learn it. And for that reason, like I've, even like with music, like I did music at university, and like I practiced like loads by myself, and I made loads of progress, like learning by myself. But when it came to studying with a teacher, I was always like, so like resistant to like whatever method they wanted me to do or the stuff they gave me to like work on or whatever. Cause I was always like, nah, like I can do it, you know, like, I don't know, man, like that's just kind of hit me right there. That, yeah, like it probably would be good for me to, you know, if I decide to move to Vietnam or whatever, instead of like going with my usual thing, just like I'm going to get a Vietnamese teacher and just like, you know, learn their way, you know, instead of my way, instead of trying to like force makes me wonder like how, because I did pretty well at school and stuff, like how did that happen? Because that's all just like shoehorning everybody through a thing. When it turns out as soon as I like finished school, I just didn't put up with like teachers anymore. And ironically, I am an English teacher. So there we go.
Wow, man, you're fighting yourself, dude. That's your Darth Vader moment.
But actually my way of like English teaching is like really like non-linear. Like you know, if the student turns up or the student wants to like talk about something, I turned the whole thing into like a party, basically. It's just like, just be friends with them, you know, because that's how you know, with a language, you know, that's how you're going to learn best. You know, you're going to learn more, you know, staying in a hostel for a week in Germany than you are like going to an academy in Germany, you know, because you're going to be like, hey, start drinking and then start asking, how do you say this? And, you know, like within a week, you'll be doing great.
Possibly.
I think so. I think like rote learning or whatever is like dumb. Sorry, what is this? The ESL teacher podcast?
You're all good.
But yeah, I think that like that's a reflection. Actually, the way that I teach is more like how I would like to be taught, and I don't know what that is. But I'm very resistant to other people's like way of teaching me something.
Might need to check your ego, bro.
Right? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I didn't even realize that until right now. Like, what is that?
Oh man. I'm kind of out of stuff for this topic, dude. Like my tank is out of gas. Do you have anything else you want to add to this?
No, I think my taint is pretty out of gas as well.
All right, Michael BJ. That's the thing, dude. Like you can't get rid of that shame associated with that ever now. That's always gonna be on your mind.
It's not even in my mind. I'm dropping it as soon as you stop recording with it.
I'm gonna send it to you on a Christmas card.
But no, it's been a absolute pleasure being on again, man. I hope that there was something in there that was somewhat related to progress.
I don't even know what happened.
I had fun, and in my personal reality, that's the important thing.
That's all that matters. Thanks so much, Michael, for coming on, man. Cheers, man. I had fun too, brother. Thanks for listening to the Spiritual Phoenix podcast. If you've got a question you want answered, a topic you'd like discussed, or a guest you want to hear, check out the forum in the show notes. Follow our social media for other great content.